Hello, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, and welcome to Fanalysis, Marvel again today. I am Reti 4, this is Evannova 95.
Hello?
And this is Jensaarai 1.
I am Iron Man.
Today we're going to be covering Ant-Man and the Wasp, which is slightly late, as you probably noticed if you're the other side of the pond.
Yeah, because someone's country didn't get it until recently, so we had to put off this review for so long.
Yeah, unfortunately a little thing called the World Cup happened, so the studios decided that Europe wasn't going to get it until a month afterwards, because apparently we weren't going to go to the cinema because the football was on. Strange logic.
Yeah, and that's the ironic thing, guys. Callan's not even a huge football fan.
At all. I mean, I don't care for football in the slightest, but alas,
you might have
just
just offended some of our fans, just saying.
What's new? So unfortunately I didn't get to see it until a month later, but now that I have, we're going to jump right in and discuss it for you today. So, opening with general impressions, guys, general thoughts on the film. What were you basically thinking about this when you came out at the end?
The character interactions. It was so much fun. Just the way every single character just took the piss out of each other. It was funny and genuine.
And I agree with you there, Connor, because I actually feel like I guess you could call it Ant-Man saga has some of the best character interactions almost throughout the entirety of Marvel, and I'm glad that stuck through to this movie, because that was one of my favorite parts about the original Ant-Man.
I definitely agree with the enjoyment of that in this film, for sure. I wouldn't say necessarily that has the best in the MCU.
Well, not the absolute best,
yeah,
but
it's definitely up there.
Up?
Yeah, it's definitely up there, and it's a lot more consistent with the kind of average moments for that, I think. Most of the other films focus on individual beats that they kind of big up around drama and tension and character arcs and such, whereas this one has a lot of individual small scenes that are just kind of continuing the general theme of how the characters interact with one another. They also tie it quite well to the humour. So it's the kind of character moments of what's paired with the usual Marvel-style bathos, rather than the big plot moments, which I think works better for this.
Another big part of it too is like the original Ant-Man had a really strong sense of family, and this one continues that and even enhances it, which is again something I really liked about the original film.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a particular scene we'll talk about later as well that can perfectly encapsulate. Well, multiple scenes really, but there's a particular one that stands out to me that perfectly encapsulates that kind of family ideal, and it really does a good job of hammering that kind of not theme, but that kind of atmosphere and presence in the film, without beating you over the head with it and saying you should feel this, you should think this is how it should be. It's very not subtle, but it's nicely introduced.
I would also say that this film also has a strong sense of like legacy to it, because despite it only really being the second one in the series itself, these are quote unquote legacy versions of past characters from that universe. So that sense really feeds into it really well. Scott and Hope are not the first ones to wear these suits and take up these identities.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because they're kind of the first characters. Well, they are the first characters in the MCU that have that. Unless I'm mistaken, they're not. It doesn't really focus up and kind of make it legacy heroes as it does in the comics. It's just a case of them taking the same, identities, and kind of. It doesn't really focus on it as like a big story mechanic, but it's definitely there in the background, and yeah, it opens the door for that kind of passing on of the mantle idea that they can big up for the next films and the next generation as we start to lose the original kind of founding member actors and such.
And the other thing about the second movie, where it takes something from the first movie and drastically improves it, is that this movie has much, much, much better villains. The central villain in Ghost is actually a character with a lot of depth, and then the criminal threat in Walton Goggins' character, well, he's pretty straightforward, but he's entertaining, and his crew is actually kind of fun to watch. He's not like a poor Corey Stoll in the first movie, who was just a lunatic and nothing else.
I mean, let's be real here. Yellow Jacket was probably one of the worst Marvel villains since probably like Abomination.
He was kind of like an Obadiah Stane Mark II. In terms of
except without any of the charm.
Precisely, yeah, without any of the kind of charisma to drag it forward. I definitely agree, Connor. It's you said she was, or the main villain was, had a lot of depth and layers to it. I wouldn't say I'd go as far to say that, but I've definitely found myself more engaged with her.
Yeah,
more layers
than
previous villains.
Of course.
She is she kind of represents how Marvel is putting some effort into fixing their villain problem, because that's been one of the most persistent nagging problems, is that their villains are really weak. They pour all of this effort into humanizing and fleshing out their main hero characters, but they don't leave the villains any time to grow, so they just turn into these, well, basically just evil platitude spewing caricatures with no real motivation. Whereas this character, she had a motivation, and she was invested, and therefore you could invest in her.
Yeah, they struggle with tying in the character. It's kind of a timing thing with them. They struggle to spend the amount of time on the villains that they need within the plot to kind of get us to care about them, unless they happen to be people that are within multiple films. So they, particularly with this film, they did a good job of tying in her motivation with the kind of key struggle between the characters, with it being the contention of who currently has possession of the lab, and making it kind of like a chase scene, which again we'll dive into more when we start talking about the plot. It did a good job of tying that kind of continued development and exploration of our character with with each plot scene as it moved forward. I think that helped them a lot.
And that's actually one of the areas where this movie succeeds, because neither of the villains actually had a plan. Their actions were always in response to events within the storyline itself. It's like they had a stated goal, but they weren't planning things out. They weren't following the step-by-step thing, and the heroes are supposed to be puppets dancing on strings. It was literally every single character is playing speed chess with each other.
And so I think it's clear to see that we've got a generally positive impression of this film overall. So why don't we dive straight into the full synopsis and go through sequence by sequence as to what we think of the film as a whole in greater detail.
Spoiler alert!
Yes, spoiler.
Several months late.
Spoiler here for this movie that came out like over a month ago,
or more if you're seeing this much later on. Yeah. Yeah. So we'll dive into now, as we tend to with these analyses, and go deep. So where does the film open, Evan?
Well, it opens with an extension of the flashback sequence we got in the previous film in 1987 with the original Ant-Man and Wasp disabling that missile headed that was launched by I believe it was the Soviets, correct?
They established
so.
that.
Yes, I believe it was. Anyway, it is basically a retread of that, but with a few added bits. We see Hank and we see and we see Janet, the original Wasp, interact with Hope just before they go on the mission, and then we see what happens during the mission proper, with Janet unfortunately having to go into the quantum realm to stop the missile from killing everybody and being lost in the realm. And then after that, we get a heartbreaking scene with Hank coming home to Hope as a little girl and breaking the news that her mommy is gone. And was anyone else just really touched by this?
I was.
What a way to begin a movie! Really.
Given the fact that we didn't have that much familiarity with her at this point, or anyone involved, being reintroduced to them as the characters for this film, it was a very well carried off scene. It didn't linger on it too much. It didn't, ham anything up or extend it out with some great big musical piece. It was just a very honest, very natural, quiet moment between a father and his daughter, and the recognition in her eyes as she sees him and sees that she can't see her mother. So kids are clever. They pick up on that very quickly, that kind of thing. And it played out as such.
Yeah, and the scene at the very start, because I personally loved watching Michelle Pfeiffer's interactions with with little Hope there, because, well, that was just charming. Just the whole bit where she pretended to fall asleep, very plainly exaggerated.
It was it was a nice.
It's
moment.
Very wholesome, but very real. It didn't feel, none of it felt forced. It really just did feel like a child and a parent just having fun together, which is what obviously you should expect.
One of the real strengths of this film as a whole, actually, very good child acting, but especially with the interactions between them and the parents. None of it felt cheesy, which I have a high sensitivity to that kind of thing. It very quickly moves to cringe territory.
It's his kryptonite, folks. Yeah. You can't take any of it.
Though speaking of things that could
slightest for this.
Though speaking of things that could potentially move into cringe, the digital de-aging of Michael Douglas and Michelle Pfeiffer actually looks good. You can tell it's there, but they're not in the middle of the uncanny valley. They don't look creepy. It's not like Jeff Bridges in Tron.
Yes.
Yeah, I think part of the reason for that is they expressly state that it was a combination of digital and makeup work, so the transition isn't quite as drastic.
Yeah,
exactly.
It works very well. Obviously, you're aware that it's there, as you said, but it's nothing that's jarring or drawing your attention to it. It's just something that you can very easily forget.
I mean, from a distance, you would think that is just young Michael Douglas, you know?
Yeah, Michael Douglas in particular as well. They did a very good job with him.
I think it's a little bit more obvious with Pfeiffer, but not to any extent that like breaks the movie or anything. I mean, they did the best they could realistically do in this situation.
Completely agree.
And what you mentioned about how they basically supplemented actual makeup effects with digital effects, that to me is kind of how digital effects should be used overall, because, well, the over-reliance on CG is one of the things that makes so many movies look artificial.
Indeed, you always have to blend the practical with the digital to get the true real effect that you're looking for, and that's always been the case on kind of every layer or level of the industry with that. I'm glad that.
I mean, that's what they did with Voldemort in Goblet.
Every good thing, Gollum is mocapped, which is kind of a quintessential example of the pairing of the physical and digital.
There's no makeup involved in that. That's
no, of course. But I mean, in terms of the pairing digital and physical, it's not it's just completely animated. That was the big driving step of that one. Motion capture in general. It's kind of the tip of the spear on that one.
Yes, and so after we have that heartbreaking sequence, we cut to something a little bit more lighthearted. With we cut to the present day, and Scott is playing with his daughter, Cassie Lang.
Talking about child actors that did a very good job. This one then is Abby Ryder Thornton, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah, and she did. Yes, she did a great job. I mean, she did great in the first movie too, but I think she really brings her A game here, and it's probably because she's had a little bit more experience since then.
Well, and she had more to do. She was more present in this one in terms of the actual scene interplays between the two. So it was a really touching scene. Great from both characters. Really nice to establish the bond they have and why. Not the central tension, but one of the key kind of tension points of this film is that he can't be caught. This is why there are stakes behind him not being found outside of the house because of his bond with his daughter. It's very important that they set that up, and I think they did it well.
Yeah, and we learned that he can't leave the house because of his actions in Civil War. He took a plea, and now he's under house arrest.
Which is a strange punishment, to lock him in his house for 2 years. And of course you're supposed to be punishing these people, but if you're just going to let them out after 2 years and then 3 years of additional separate punishment, what is locking him in really going to do? It's not. It was a strange one to me, but it was a nice idea for the film.
I mean, house arrest does suck. You have to.
Oh, sure.
The cabin fever is strong.
Yeah.
Sure, but do you really want to give someone like this cabin fever? I mean, is that the best treatment for this kind of situation? It feels like that's just asking for the tension to explode in your face.
I know, but they think that he has no access to his suit, so they probably don't view him as much of a threat. I don't know.
Yeah, but it works fine for the film. It was a point in my head as I was watching it.
I imagine it was the sort of thing where he managed to just eke out concessions by playing on the sympathy of, I have a daughter.
Yeah.
The daughter probably helped him with that. Given how adorable they both are together.
And I gotta say, the whole obstacle course he sets up for her in the house. And
I love it was creative and brilliantly executed as a sequence, but I love at the end as well how it's kind of justified the silliness of it with him saying, you try and entertain a kid without being able to leave the house. It makes sense that he's put so much effort in because he has very little choice in the matter.
I mean, not an unfair complaint in the grand scheme of things.
Of course.
But of course, just the lengths he goes to just ends up making him so much better at what he does. See that? I had to learn that. Magic.
Yep.
It was a funny clip.
It's magic. Yeah.
I do like that.
So afterwards, Cassie unfortunately gets taken by his ex-wife and I can never remember what
Paxton.
Yeah. It's a weird dynamic.
Really likes Scott and likes to give him lots of awkward hugs.
Yeah. I like that they're trying to push not push, it's the wrong word for it, but I like that they're showing that you can have a positive family dynamic with separated partners and a new member of the family being brought in and stuff. I like that they're focusing on that, but it's very cheesy though. It's like okay, that's all right, let's all have a hug here, and you can. I like how it plays off with Scott's reaction.
The look on Scott's face, he's like.
He's trying a little too hard.
I think the big thing is just the fact that this guy's very blatantly saved his daughter's life from a maniac in the last movie. So it's true. Yeah.
And it's probably a good lesson to teach kids that, hey, not all stepfathers are complete and utter sociopaths. Speaking as someone with a stepfather, I can attest that no, they can be quite good.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Given the situation.
Yeah, it's a great message to send across. It's just it's the way they do it sometimes. It's like, okay, cringe a little bit. Let's turn it down a shade.
Yeah,
but
anyway, after she unfortunately gets taken by her mom, we just see Scott lounging through the house, going about his day, playing his drum set. Who loves the drum set?
But basically,
anyone?
But I think it's very funny. I like the way they interact it.
Yeah.
It's basically just showing us this
yeah.
though, so they can set up the joke of the pattern needing to be followed later on by the ant replacement. Right. So that's why we're. Of
course, the funny thing is just it's the fact that he has learned how to use his time effectively in such a way that he won't go crazy. But at the same time, you can just see the lengths he's going to not go crazy because of cabin fever.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, if you had the life he's had, I mean, he's been to jail and he's been a superhero, so it's hard to go from that to nothing. You know,
for sure.
Yeah. But in any case, the plot really gets going when he goes to bed and he has a dream. He's back in the quantum realm and he hears voices, or one voice specifically. Who? Well, I think anyone could guess who it might be, but he doesn't know for sure. So he takes out his secret phone and he phones Hank and Hope.
It's an amusing phone call when he's like, okay, hearing this out loud, this probably isn't a big deal. Never mind.
Yeah, like, I heard your wife talking to me in the quantum realm. And then he's like, huh? You know?
Yeah. I realized you're probably just sighing.
It would have been interesting to see like Hank listening to this and being like,
yeah, I was thinking that as well. I'm glad they didn't show it because it works better without. But
for that entire
sequence, I was just envisioning like, what the hell?
What they later describe, what I imagine Michael Douglas's reaction is, it's like listening to the phone call, eyes super wide, like, what the fuck?
Precisely, because he's got a different perspective on this at this point. But not knowing that at the start of the film, you're like, oh, this is going to be ridiculous. Michael Douglas is going to do so much with this.
Yeah. So he then, after sending that message, the next night he gets knocked out after hearing, seeing something buzz around his face. Wakes up and he's in a car next to Hope, who is in her Wasp suit.
Mm. And no, she's not. She's got. She's not at all wasping at this point, is she? The
car is
tiny. The car's the size thing. It's
and they're in a tiny car, by the way.
Yeah, it's worth of note actually that they don't always wear the suits in this film. They do often go out into civilian attire, which is an interesting decision, I guess. But I suppose with the helmets being attached, there's not much they can do about that.
Right.
But they set up the car sequence because obviously we don't know from the perspective of looking at the car that this is a miniaturized version. So I like the joke there. But also we get introduced to the situation with the reason they were separated and the reactions they had because he didn't call to help with the Germany situation.
Germany.
Yeah.
It was Germany, right? They were in Germany.
Yeah, and that whole thing in the airport in Avengers 2.
Yeah.
No. Captain America: Civil War. Derp.
Yeah, but that was in Germany.
AKA Avengers 3.
Yes. Yeah. Also, no. Yeah. Very true. So that that's her kind of situation with him right now. She's angry that she wasn't called to help by him, which is understandable. I like that tension. It works as a good dynamic for her being angry. Hank's, I suppose, slightly less so, but he was never really that against him in the first place. It was more her and her feeling of betrayal.
He just hates because he was specifically against Stark, being aware of his technology and being aware of him. So that's what's more appealing for him. But anyway, I
like worthy of note as well. I like that they're not actively like we're angry with you. She specifically says I'm not angry with you, despite the fact that she is kind of. It isn't hammered on. It's not the entire film where oh my god you're so stupid and she has to learn that lesson. It's very quickly kind of pushed aside and
as well as just a scene later where she reveals, no, it's not that you went. It's why the fuck didn't you go with me?
Yeah.
Why didn't you bring me along?
Yeah.
You wouldn't have gotten caught if I was there.
Yeah, I like that. There are specific moments...
Which is debatable considering what happened, but yeah.
There are specific moments...
I think Hope might be overestimating herself just a tad there, but yeah.
I don't know. I mean, if you manage to miniaturize, you can get him out of there pretty well. It depends, I guess. But
during the fight, I don't know.
Well, having two Ant-Men is better than one.
That's for sure.
True.
But I like that throughout this film there are a lot of individual moments where they capture the kind of relationship between these two very, very well. And we'll talk about it more as they come up as we go through them, of course. But they have a really nice dynamic that doesn't get bogged down by this initial introduction of them, her being angry with him, which is very important because in most films this would have been like the prevailing
total cliche.
Tension.
Yeah,
it would have been hammered in every 5 minutes throughout the entire course of the film, and it wouldn't have been pushed past, which is nice to see here, especially considering it's Ant-Man and the Wasp. You don't want a film where it's Ant-Man separated from the Wasp until the very end.
That would have been the worst thing they could have done.
It's the fact that they keep the mistake in perspective. It's not like, oh my god, you fucking traitor, you destroyed everything. It's, you fucking idiot. Yeah. What the hell, man?
That's kind of all of the issues they have with them, but we'll get to that as we go through, because that's basically all of their problems.
Yeah. So Hope takes him to their new laboratory, and he sees what they've been working on. They're currently working on a way to tunnel into the quantum realm in order to rescue Janet, who they now are convinced is alive, especially now since, due to Scott's dream, and basically they need to quite literally pick his brain in order to pinpoint her location so they could go save her.
Oh, wasn't that lab just the coolest thing ever?
Yes, it was. With the ants helping. Again, that's brilliant.
It's one of these things that makes absolutely no sense, and of course it wouldn't work like that, but it's so perfect for the comic book setting that you don't get.
Wait, what do you mean wouldn't work like that? Well, like the lab shrinking?
Simple things like the... Okay, how did he make the wheels, for example? Like, how did he make the wheels face into the ground, and the size scale required of making the retractable handle, and the cars moving at the same speed of the huge cars despite being tiny.
We'll get to that. Maybe
it all is something. It's very easily hand waved away, and it's the film plays with it in such a fun way. You don't care that it's unrealistic. It's one of the it's probably the best example of real comic book science being thrown in your face, and not breaking the reality of the moments for me.
I mean, them just toting around a building like it's a briefcase. Just the visual alone is just brilliant.
And the scale being attached to the humor, it never gets old. Like they did it all the way through the first one, and they've done it for this one as well, and it never stops being funny for me.
It's just the fact that this movie actually fully addresses the ramification of the Ant-Man tech. It's just both its most extreme applications, shrinking to the point where you're subatomic, or just practical applications where you're turning a building into something you can fit into the trunk of your car.
It's very good at blending those two together. The whimsy of the entertainment factor and just the practical elements of, yes, we need to move around. These guys have been on the run for ages, and they've been able to do it because they have this extremely useful advantage at their disposal.
Yeah, and we get even better. Sorry, go ahead, Connor.
They can basically just create a massive laboratory wherever they are, whenever they need to, and just modify their tech and work on it and build new stuff and stay one step ahead of the authorities, who have no counter to it because these are the only people with the technology.
One of the reasons he's so protective of it.
Yeah. So we get another good example of those, physics in the next sequence, because they go to a restaurant headed by this gangster because there's this part they need in addition to Scott's information, and we get our first action scene when they, of course, try to double cross Hope. We finally get to see the Wasp in all her glory.
Yeah, and it's a great introduction to her. Really creatively done, funny, intense. Made good use of her specific abilities that Ant-Man doesn't have, so it's it's a new display in that regard.
You gave her wings? Not give me wings? It's like, oh, I could have.
Oh, I had wings, yeah. Oh, I had the blasters too. It makes perfect sense, because why would you give Scott those? I do not get the impression he'd be as graceful in the air as she is.
This scene is also our introduction to the two villains of the piece, the aforementioned mob boss Sonny Burch, played by Walton Goggins, and Ghost, who at the moment is kind of her identity is kept ambiguous and is made into a bit of a reveal later, but is played by Hannah John Kamen.
Both. Well, I mean, the mob boss in particular hams it up in the role, as is required for that kind of character. Again, you can see this person in every comic book ever, really, at some point.
Of course, the funny thing is that him hamming it up, to me, is part of what made his character so believable, because he's a character who gets by on... Well, he's basically a glorified salesman who basically decided, screw the law. So he's all about the showmanship. He's all about pitching the idea and getting you on board with it.
Precisely. The theatrics make sense with a character like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like Ghost as well. She's obviously not really a character at this point; she's just a threat in this part of the story. But yeah, what they do with her later is it's engaging, interesting, and not really unique. But it's the flavour of how they show it as the film moves forward is always interesting enough for me.
And
her abilities in this sequence add to the action as well. It was very cool to see the visual
ability
effect
to
of the
phase
phasing
and teleport and stuff, and use their abilities against them. I mean, Scott goes in and tries to help her, but it doesn't do any good, and she ends up actually going to Hank and stealing their lab.
The visual effect in particular I want to bring attention to, because it's not just the kind of blurring effect, which is very not easy, but it's very standard these days to do that kind of thing. But also there's the occasional frame where she lingers for or jumps or jutters for like a split second. There's like with every major moment where she has these kind of movements on screen, there's one frame that stands out that I always thought was very well placed. Either it be a slight kind of minute jump scare or a weird kind of jarring kind of bolt of pain in her expression. They always did a really good. They had really good artful decisions of when to place those moments for me. Very effective.
Man, imagine what filming those must have been like, because she would have had to like go in those positions at those times and then film over it again and again and again.
Yeah, for a lot of it. Yeah, definitely. It's a really good way of snapshotting her not personality this early on, because she's still got the mask on, but her what she's about. It gives those brief moments of just like I say, snapshots. It's very cool. I like the idea.
Yep. So, like I said, Ghost captures their laboratory, and now our heroes are basically, well, what are we gonna do now? And they go to they have a rather funny transition where it's like Scott's like, well, I know who could help us, and Wasp was like, we're not, not going to them, not going to them.
Doing it. I'm not doing it.
And we're immediately embroiled with the misfits. The three of us call them the misfits. Basically, Scott's friends from jail from the first movie.
Yeah, who they're doing exactly the same shtick, really. I like the idea of them trying to go legitimate and and make use of the talents they have. It's very well placed in this film. They don't spend too much time with them at all, and with the possible exception of one scene we'll get to later.
It does kind of make sense, because becoming a security outfit, it seems to me it's one of those cases, if you can prove to people that you're trustworthy, the fact that you have a criminal record kind of comes in handy, because you're actually examining the job of creating a security system from the perspective of, okay, how would I try and beat this? So what do I have to address?
Precisely, yeah. Which then it makes sense why he's pushing for so many security cameras, because he's thinking, what would stop me rather than what would stop most people. I like that idea at the very start. But they don't spend too much time with these guys. I think they use the time for those characters well. They were comic relief and they were side characters. And
they're also static characters. They don't really evolve too much. Like they're here to show. Yeah, they just show up, provide their reaction, and then they're gone. They don't overstay their welcome.
Yeah, which is nice, because their shtick could get old real quick. So it's good that they balance that out. Nicely.
They are so easy to overuse.
There's one scene where they come close for me. I'm thinking, okay, you're dragging it a little bit, but we'll get to that later. But apart from that, just it's all very well used for me. It worked well.
So after talking to them and getting their plans ready, they go to another potential ally for help, and it is Hank's friend Bill Foster from the comics, better known as Goliath, played by Lawrence Fishburne.
Yeah, surprise cast.
His first ever Marvel role, MCU role.
Yeah, for sure.
Because he did. For those of you who don't know, he actually did play a Marvel character once before. He played Silver Surfer in Rise of the Silver Surfer.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. I didn't really dive into much of the promotional material for this film. Was he, highlighted as being in it in the trailers and such, or was that a surprise throw-in?
It was a surprise for me.
Yes, he was actually. The scene where he and Scott are talking about their size records, that was in the trailer.
But it wasn't in the first trailer though, because I remember seeing the first trailer, when this thing first came out, and I don't remember seeing him. So
it was probably in the second trailer.
It was a small bit anyway, so it's very easy to overlook regardless. But yeah, I remembered most of my friends saying they were very surprised that he was in it, so I wasn't sure whether he had been snuck in intentionally. But yeah, no, I like the scene. I like the fact that it's picking up the idea that there's past between these two, because it sets up the flaws of Hank, because it's important to provide flaws for these characters. Because he doesn't really have an arc in this film, but they add enough kind of individual moments that kind of shape and redefine the details of who he is for us, instead of just keeping him static from the same as the first film, which is important given the fact that we're supposed to care about his character and his reunion with his wife.
Mm-hmm. It also kind of provides some insight into, it wasn't just Janet who was helping him during his superhero days. Hank had other allies.
Yes,
which is interesting. Which again feeds into the comics somewhat. I mean, obviously Goliath in the comics is his relationship to Hank is different, but the basic foundations are there.
Yeah, again, they're playing with the cores of the characters, and they're moving this bit left and that bit right, but they're still keeping the heart of who they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to represent in the universe for the MCU. They're making it their own, but they're not disrespecting the original material, which is what I like about it so much. I give them a lot of leeway for that reason.
Yes. So they resolve, and then it's in that sequence that it's revealed that Scott didn't destroy his original ant suit.
Of course I did. Of course I got rid of it. Yeah. No, I mean, what if I potentially hadn't done?
Yeah, and Hank's like, "What do you mean?" It's like, well.
And this is followed by
and then it goes, "I can't believe you didn't." It's like, well, how could I do that?
Yes,
it was your life's work.
Yeah, that was funny. The flip of the scene, going with basically the playing up to both sides of his opinion from Hank. That was a really funny scene for me. It was very simple, but it worked really well. The timing was perfect. A lot of the humor in this film is basically reliant on Michael Douglas's delivery, and it really worked. He nailed it for even just the small, simple stuff, which particularly following this next scene, which I found one of the funniest in the film, as I'm sure a lot of people did. They infiltrate the schools to pick up the suit,
yes,
and play with them because
Scott
of the damage regulator
malfunctions.
The scale. And this must have been so much fun to shoot.
I'm sure, but yeah, like they have to go into a broom closet. Then he gets too big, hits the ceiling. Then he shrinks down again, but he only shrinks to like the size of like a little kid.
Yeah.
So he steals some clothes from the school and pretends to be a student. It's so
just the bit where he's walking down the hall.
Yeah.
Hey, where's your hall pass? And then Scott just runs, and the teacher's like,
It's perfect. And most especially about this, though, I love the kind of interplay between the Wasp and him. Hope and he have a very it's kind of a flaw with the film. Their interplay is kind of inconsistent in how they feel at any one moment, which kind of makes sense because again she's not wholly against him at this point or at all really. They just having a bit of a rough patch emotionally, but this is where I really see the kind of the Ant-Man and the Wasp dynamic at play. It's when when he's jumping and he's like, "Oh, you almost got it, like that little gentle jab at him is really kind of encapsulates those characters for me.
Yeah,
especially
she's jabbing, but
of,
she's not coming off as like. Yeah, she's jabbing, but she's not coming. Well, yeah, she's jabbing, but she's not coming off as like deliberately trying to be mean. She's just having some fun, which is nice. It's not like totally mean spirited.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. It's just she's finding it funny, which is part of their dynamic. He is funny to her.
Mm-hmm. And then we get one of my favorite lines when they run back to the car.
Yeah, the ending. Talking about his delivery.
Yeah. Oh my god, that is one of the few times in this film I legitimately like laughed out loud.
Hey Tiger, how was
school today? I know it's not technically the funniest line even he says in this film, but just something about that delivery at that time just tickled me. For me,
it's the turn in the chair. It's when he leans back and it's so sport. It's like every motion about what he's doing there is encapsulating that moment for every other time it's been done, legitimately. So it's really really funny. It's the perfect delivery from him.
You want some string cheese and a juice box? And then he's like,
"We have those?
Do you have that?" Yeah.
And he's still a kid, so it's even more funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but brilliantly done scene, and again, it's a nice example of attention to detail because they didn't need to do that. That was purely for the sake of padding the time with humor and doing it very effectively. It was playing with the effects. So they're clearly having fun making these.
Mm-hmm. But again, it's a moment that doesn't completely break the tone, which is another issue these movies can often have, which I like. It felt.
It was well placed.
Yeah, well placed. I was about to say natural, but it wasn't natural. It was more just smooth.
Yeah, it wasn't forced, and it was well placed in the runtime. It was time. We had a little funny sequence, and it didn't drag on too long. It was perfectly placed and timed.
Bring some brevity into the situation.
It's also just the funny thing it says as about the logistics of having a malfunctioning Ant-Man suit and how you would repair it. Like just the bit where Hope basically just crawls up onto his leg, opens up the belt buckle, and the whole thing is like this big for her, and it's like yeah. It's the fact that is actually kind of an advantage. If you need to do very fine repairs on the fly, get big, and suddenly fine repairs aren't so fine anymore because you're moving a big brick-sized component like this big from here to here.
It's very true, yeah. Lots of different ways you can take advantage of that. But it was a great sequence. The next one is the
they got
signal tracking.
They got the old suit, and they used the suit to track Ghost's location.
Which
but
was it was one.
They attempt to sneak in, but that doesn't end well.
Yeah, this actually irritated me because it's one of those film things. It always happens. They took their eyes off the villain for like 1 second, and then of course they wake up and knock them out. It was you saw it coming a mile off, and it was very like, okay, this scene again.
In this sequence, though, I can say it probably makes at least a little bit sense because the whole point is that she's out of phase and is never in one singular state at any one period. So it's like maybe even when her body's asleep, there's some version of her that's still awake and looking around. So she's never truly...
I completely agree. It was the nature of her abilities that made it more believable for me.
Yeah, the bit that made it palatable for me was the fact that they legitimately thought she's out of her suit, therefore she can't do it. You know, they had a reason to lower their guard at least somewhat. So that made it viable for me. It was still like the framing of it. I was like, oh, okay, I know what's going to happen.
They didn't realize that it was an inherent superpower and not tech.
Right, unlike theirs.
Which makes sense for them, of course.
Yeah, it actually makes perfect sense. They the thing is that aside from Scott's little encounter with the Avengers in Captain America 2, Captain America 3, Captain America 3, they've never actually encountered superpowered enemies. Every single person that they've tussled with has always just had competing tech. So it's like having to change your entire mindset. It's like you're a bounty hunter who's suddenly confronted by a Jedi. Shit.
It's a big shift.
Exactly.
Yeah, it makes sense. But anyway, they get knocked unconscious.
She knocks them out, and they wake up all tied to chairs, and that's when we get one of our twists that Bill is working with Ghost.
Yeah. I liked that they didn't make it quite clear until the very end what his deal was. I was constantly guessing, is he manipulating her, or is he genuinely good and Hank's got it wrong? Because there's a line from Hank where he says he's lying to him. You know, he's feeding her a pack of lies or something like that. And I thought, oh, okay, so maybe he's just trying to use her the same way that the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents did. But no, he is honest. But I like the fact that we don't know that until the very end. They ride that secret.
I like the fact that they build him up almost as a red herring villain, because that's another aspect about how this movie's villains are so much better. They also address that there are shades of gray, there are some areas, because when you actually stop and think about Ghost's motivation, she wants to make the pain stop.
Yeah, I like that.
Doesn't care what she has. Yeah, and she doesn't care what she has to do it because it's so intense. And you kind of feel sympathy for her, even as you're realizing that if she keeps going on the way she's going on, she's going to have to be put down.
Yeah, I like that they made it such a human and emotional motive. I think we'll get to the end bits where I think it gets a little bit. They pushed it too far. She should have pulled back a bit at the end for me, prior to the big climax. But I get why they didn't. They needed some sort of villain fight in the final sequence. But apart from that, I very much like that she is doing this because she physically needs to. You know, she's not in her right mind at this point. There's a reason after the cure happens that she's a lot more, not normalized, but you see her kind of return to herself, and it's because she is just literally being split apart every moment of her life. So she's going to be a bit unbalanced. To say nothing of the upbringing she's had, because we get obviously another part.
Yeah,
of the
her origins are a bit.
She's another one of those characters who really reminds you that, hey guys, for a while there, S.H.I.E.L.D. was basically being controlled by Hydra.
Yeah,
and she's the product of that.
It's another great kind of result of them having had the Hydra influence with S.H.I.E.L.D. there, because it means they can tell these dark stories without kind of tainting the nature of what S.H.I.E.L.D. is supposed to be and the characters that are attached to it as a result.
It's literally
she was literally just an assassin there.
Yeah, and it's kind of harrowing who and what where she came from too, because she's interesting, like for her backstory, if nothing else, because
it also makes you wonder, like who in Shield may or may not have known about her.
Yes. I'm sure Nick did for sure. So there's another one of those his dark secrets that has got shuffled in the background that can come into the fore later.
Yeah.
And we don't know what's going to happen with her as well. There's still material to be drawn on for her now. She's not just been swept under the carpet. One of the most not important, but the most impactful thing for me though was post the parents' deaths after the explosion. Was the people trying to help her,
firefighter trying
pick her
to
up.
yeah.
I was like, I liked how they played that more of an emotional beat rather than like a, oh my god, science fiction, whoa, I'm confused. It was more like a, he's trying to help, he tries again. Yes, of course he's confused by what's happening, but the focus is on her and the immediate kind of realization of what she now has to face. It wasn't like a big weird quirky moment focusing on the fact that she's weird to him. It was about her. I liked the way it was shot, if nothing else.
Yeah. So, and after we get that reveal, Ghost discusses her and Bill's plan, which is to go into the quantum realm, find Janet like them, but they plan to use her energies as a way to cure Ghost of her affliction that we talked about a second ago. But unfortunately, doing so would most likely kill Janet.
Yeah. Now this is where the kind of problems I have with start coming in.
Yeah,
Why didn't they just
for the
get
notes
Janet
here?
to help?
You put evil in quotes.
Yeah, in quotes, because obviously it's an evil plan, but it's only
Right.
it's a selfish plan. It's a human selfish plan. Yes, it's obviously a very bad thing to do, but you can understand why she wants to do it, especially considering the point that Janet is at this point just this kind of theoretical quasi being,
which even Bill brings up.
It's like you don't know. It's like, for me, it's like the idea of Janet surviving was almost kind of it's the sort of thing where when I watched the first movie and saw the scenes, I was like, okay, they're probably going to do something where Scott interacts with Janet because quantum realm. But for me, it's like, it was one of those things where I personally just couldn't see how this would happen, because it just seemed to me that Janet would basically just be trapped, isolated inside her suit, shrinking for all eternity until her air ran out. And now it's just an empty Wasp suit with some mummified corpse inside of it.
They could have gone very dark with it, and it never really explains outside of the fact that she's evolved, how she survived. I mean, if nothing else, 30 years of isolation, but well, not quite 30 years, however many years it was. But it's like, how is this woman still sane?
Well, I mean, your consciousness evolving and all that. I mean, you could.
There are ways
around
that.
that.
Yeah, there are ways around it,
around
but it is a hand wave. That's all.
It's a sort of thing where I hope they address it in the sequel, like depending on how they address the post-credit scenes we'll come to later.
Yes.
Yeah. They need to give us some odd quirks to explain the kind of result of her experience.
Yeah, like maybe explain that she transcended human consciousness is now 2 steps away from being God.
I meant more just the emotional quirkness, but whatever.
Yeah. Speaking of odd quirks, Hank has a brilliant plan to free them.
I both love and hate this moment. 1, it's funny. 2, it's clever. And 3, it works. But the fourth thing that kind of taints it for me is I hate that it's making it's teaching him not to be kind in this moment. Obviously it doesn't, because he's a good person, but this is the sort of thing that turns good people away from being good, effectively. He was doing this out of the goodness of his heart. He was making the right call, and it bit him on the ass. I hate it when that's necessary, but it was necessary in this moment.
Because that's the other thing about the movie that really reinforces the ambiguity of everything, because when you get right down to it, pretty much every single character in this movie is operating on the wrong side of the law. And when you're on the wrong side of the law, you got to make some pretty ruthless calls to not get deaded.
Ironic how we're dealing with characters who in the comics started off as some of the most wholesome and kid-friendly Marvel ever created.
Yeah,
and now they're all criminals.
Even in the comics, they went dark, like at various points.
Well, they did, but I'm talking like 60s.
Oh, of course,
not the stuff that came later.
Yes,
which I'm really glad that never.
Yeah, but
let's just say things happened in Ant-Man and Wasp comics that are fairly infamous and probably wouldn't have flown too well on film.
Yeah, that's to say at the very least. Yeah, I'm glad they left that out here and gone for the wholesome approach, especially considering we're not focusing on these two as the main characters. These are the mentor characters in this picture. It's the next generation that we've got to focus on. But yeah, this ruse works as you'd expect, as horribly heart-wrenching as it is.
Which you think Bill would kind of like, having known Hank so long, that never.
Well, yeah, but that's a very believable thing. I mean, it's been a very long time. He's old. He's clearly got this condition from having been the man for so long. I buy it. It's heartbreaking that it's stomped on his goodness.
Yes. So they escape from the lab, and then they relocate to the woods.
Indeed.
After escaping with their lab. They break out of the lab to get the lab, and then they take the lab into the woods.
Yeah, the plot very much revolves around this laboratory, and it's why I think that the idea of the villains working, as I said in the beginning, is because they want the lab. Everyone involved wants the lab, so it becomes kind of a tug-of-war tension sequence in every part of the climax. It worked well to allow breathing room for each of the characters and their different motivations. Very effective. But yeah, we get one of the other funniest, but also emotional moments of the film.
And also arguably one of the best acted.
Yes, yeah, in a weird
depending
way.
On perspective.
They must have had
that's why I said depending
takes.
On perspective.
Yeah, they must have had so many takes for this. I mean,
I would love a gag reel of just that sequence. There had to be several.
Just Paul Rudd pretending to be Michelle Pfeiffer.
I know.
Yeah, but of course, this is the sequence where Janet takes over Scott's mind. I'm completely unbeknownst to him.
What location she's in Quantum Realm, so they can pilot their vehicle accordingly.
Yeah, and you get the interplay between each of the characters in the trio and how they're feeling. They very quickly cotton on to what's happened, of course. There's no awkward, wait, what are you doing, Scott? They immediately know what's happened. They immediately feel the appropriate emotions for that. And my favourite thing about it is that they never actively address the awkwardness or the weirdness. It's very much there. You can see it in their eyes, but they don't go, well, this is weird, or anything like that. They don't waste their precious time with their mother or wife.
It's not like
in this moment.
Infinity War when you have the Falcon commenting on Bruce and Black Widow. Yeah,
it's not like directly throwing it in your face. You don't need to do that. You can see it, and you can see that they are recognizing it. But they spend the time appropriately. They're reuniting with their mother
and the fact
wife,
they do address it when Scott comes out of
of
it,
course,
and he's like,
holding the hand.
Why am I holding your hand?
But even then, he doesn't really do that kind of. It's just a kind of very quick moment. It doesn't draw attention to it. It's just, why, what? It's very cool. I like the time and the moments they decide to lean on with this. And it's great for the mother as well. I know it's obviously not Michelle Pfeiffer at this point, but it's supposed to be her character. So talking from a character's perspective, I like the reaction that Paul's giving off for this.
And I just love the fact that this is technically the first introduction for her character. And this is the bit where I got to give Paul Rudd total credit because, well, when you jump from Paul Rudd pretending to be Michelle Pfeiffer to Michelle Pfeiffer,
you believe it.
Same character.
Yes.
Same character.
Yes. Very good point. It's actually kind of not impressive by the fact they made the decision, but it was brave of them to have the introduction of that character be that. It wasn't like a well, we've seen her in the flashbacks, of course, but we've not seen her actively interacting with the adult versions of the character. So it's not like we've had this.
It's just kind of layering the build up.
Yeah, many of the films would have had like a quasi kind of spectral image first before she then possesses him or something. So it was nice that they focused just solely on that and let the acting and the moment of the emotional writing of the moments carry themselves. Very, very powerful.
It was so weird because it's like the first time I saw this scene, like that bit where you see Paul Rudd standing there just being Scott, but then the second Janet takes over, you can actually just see a noticeable shift in his demeanor and his posture, where he just kind of straightens up and his expression just completely changes, like subtly but completely.
Yes.
And you could just know, oh, this isn't Scott anymore.
Yeah, and it doesn't hammer it over the head with it. You just know because it's so well done. You don't treat your audience with respect. They will get it if you do it properly, and they did. I very much enjoyed that, and it was funny throughout. It was a weird blend of humor and emotion. This is probably one of the better films for that in the Marvel universe.
Yeah. Speaking of emotion, as they're now that they've pinned down Janet's location, we cut back to the Misfits being interrogated by. In a rather interesting way. Truth serum, guys.
No, Evan, truth serum doesn't exist, for God's sake. Did you not listen to the scene?
It is truth serum.
Yeah, it is truth serum. This was the moment I was talking about earlier when I said they kind of almost overstay their welcome in this bit. They do drag this scene on a fair bit. But it was just under my tolerance level. I could put up with it. And it was funny, don't get me wrong.
And the other thing is that the fact that it did drag on for a bit is kind of the point, because Michael Pena's character is quite blatantly playing for time by trying to channel the truth serum into, okay, I'm just going to give a nonstop rant about something completely tangential and non-related, and just do that instead of giving him the direct answer to his question. I'll just be super evasive, even though I can't stop.
Which is smart, actually. Like, that's an interesting way to get around it.
I know.
Even though
probably wouldn't work in all situations,
sure whether it's intentional or not. But
yeah.
I like the fact that it didn't explain that. It was just, is it intentional or is it not? It's a nice little subtle layer for the character, who otherwise doesn't really have much going for him.
And then Ghost bursts into the room, grabs him by the collar, and basically just says, "Tell me what I want to know right now." And he's like, "Okay, they're at such and such, they're in the woods."
Yeah. And then she lets him go.
And then she just leaves.
Yeah.
It was a funny scene, and it got the job done for what.
And the reason he knows about their location is because Scott phoned him earlier, due to
this kind of. Sorry. It was basically the business issue they're having.
I was about to say a Cassie thing, but that happened earlier. She lost her shoe. That was when they were. It
was a funny little bit.
Before Hank faked his heart attack. Yeah. That's why it stopped. But it was for a business inquiry, so that's why he knows the location. And that feeds into the next sequence where he phones Scott a heads up, hey, Ghost is coming, and he tells Hank and Hope what was going on, and they get fairly pissed at him. Yeah. Not unjustifiably, but maybe a little more harsh than necessary.
Agreed.
I would say
they're not wrong to be angry, but they are being, understandably as well, very selfish here, because he's not doing this because for the hell of it. He's doing this because he values his daughter.
We should also say that the movie establishes that they could only save Janet in a certain time frame.
Yes, that's true. That's why this is such an emergency.
Adds to their anger because they're on a limited time crunch.
Of course, and it is a very obvious blunder. It's not like he didn't do anything wrong, but the reason for it and the reason he has to then leave after this, it makes sense. They're understandably blinkered in their focus on their wife and mother, respectively here. I like that both sides are to various degrees and in various ways right. It wasn't like like a liar's revealed kind of soured moment or anything, which it could otherwise have been in a different film.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. As well as just the other thing, I liked how the mob boss himself reacted to it. It's like they come out of the building and they see that the tires on their vehicle have been
zapped.
To speak.
Slashed, but it's more like just slasher flicked to little pieces of rubber everywhere, and then he just calls the feds and sicks the FBI on the Pims because he's got contacts because mob boss.
Yep. But they don't arrest Scott because he leaves to go be with his daughter before they get captured, and that. It's the next sequence where he meets back up with Cassie, and we get another really interesting sequence with an interplay between his interaction with Cassie and Hank and Hope in jail.
There's a nice little background contrast point being made here between two different parenting methods, which wasn't, again, being beaten over that. You might be beaten over the head with it, but it was definitely there. How it was a very touching scene, very, very well acted by the daughter Cassie. What is her name? Abby Ryder Fortson, I think. But very well done there. She wants to be his partner, and obviously he laughs, and he's like, "Don't laugh," and he's like, "No, I'm sorry. It's like, I wouldn't be a very good parent if I did that." And then it immediately cuts to the parent, basically enabling his daughter to go out and deal with a police station full of FBI. So I like that it was kind of made that almost a background joke as well, despite the fact it's also a very valid point because neither one is wrong here. Capable woman, he should respect her abilities, and then young child, he needs to protect her. So yeah, and it's a very touching scene by itself. It was very nice emotional interplay, like you said.
Again, this movie just delivers on the family front so well, and I love it.
And obviously, she's the impetus for his decision to go back and be Ant-Man, because the reason he was here and he was avoiding helping the others is because if he gets caught, then he goes away for a very long time, and that's not good for her. And that's his priority. And it's a very good priority for a parent to have, because that's your role. You take on that duty and become
sort of
a parent.
Yeah. So we cut back to the FBI, and he obviously rescues them by shrinking in their suits. Well, shrink in, sneak in,
Both.
kind of both. Yeah. Like, how would you? I was trying to find a single word to encapsulate both those things, and I came up short.
Ba-dum-ts.
Yeah, or small. Oh gosh.
But yeah.
Anyway, they break out. They go set up their lab again, and Hank dives into the quantum realm. And we, for the first time, like we saw a glimpse of it in the previous movie, but this is the first time we see the quantum realm in its entirety.
Yeah.
And boy, is it visually stimulating to say the least.
Yes, yeah, it was very well done special effects wise. And again, they gave more time to it, obviously, because it had more plot relevance here. But they didn't spend an eon on it, lingering on all the special effects like they did with something like Guardians of the Galaxy in the space kind of environments, or more particularly Doctor Strange with the magical other dimension effects. I like, because we've already seen this sort of thing before. We don't need a massive amount of time diving into this, but it just gave us enough. It was nice visual stimulus in the middle of the film. Or the end.
Yeah, we also. Just before he dives in, we also get a final little interplay between Hank and Bill, and Hank's even like, I'm sorry about what's going on with Ghost, but I promise you we'll find a way, which is a nice little way of somewhat making up for stepping on his toes earlier. Not entirely, in my opinion, but at least he's trying to be sincere.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and he's rushed. He's got a very short time span. The fact that he's spending any time on this is good of him. And I think that was very good for Hank. It was very well delivered from the actor, obviously, but the character as well is putting a good foot forward here. And Bill appreciates it. He respects us and he responds well to it. It's just this is where I would have liked him to then go and tell Ghost this, or at least relay very quickly as much as this to her, and then have her. This is where I would have had her moment. I would have had a small redeeming kind of moment here, where post the fight she's had with him during the distraction period with Ant-Man, she then kind of learns a lesson, and it becomes a joint effort to help bring Janet back or something. Something there that makes her more likable here. Because while it's understandable that she's faltering and she's falling into this, she's already far along it, but on the dark path, I would have preferred if it had been spanned a bit differently here, given the ultimate resolution and how much I like it.
Right.
For her character.
I would agree with that.
I would agree with that. Again, it just kind of has to do with like, we need something, otherwise we can't have an excuse for this big action scene.
Precisely,
which leads us into the big action scene, which is just an insane, creative, shrinking, growing car chase.
Yeah, as well as the fact that it's a three-way free-for-all between the Ant-Man, Ghost, and Sonny Birch and his crew.
It's kind of going all over the place as well, because obviously the laboratory is passing hands. It's different stages of people getting inside and shrunk and embiggened again. There's a lot of back and forth here, which works well for kind of balancing the tension of the characters and their different motivations.
Except for those car physics, right, Callan?
Yeah, except for the car physics, which makes no sense. But I don't care, because again, it's a fun scene, and there's so much action going on. There's so much energy. There's so much humor attached, without damaging the drama. It was very well done. And we get to see Giant Man as well. I love that. It never gets old.
Yes, he grows into his giant form in order to finally get the briefcase, and he dives into the San Francisco Bay, which he actually gets mistaken for a whale at first.
the way the legs go up.
I know.
It was such a small moment, but it was hilarious.
Little on the nose there, but
very on the nose. Very on the nose.
Yeah.
But I like it because again, it's
Moby Dick.
The tone.
The white whale.
Oh god, but yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but they take out the
effects for him being giant are pretty well done too.
Very well done, yeah. There's no uncanny valley there at all for me. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did they take out the bit they had in the trailer where he's like, "Oh, I will eat you"? No, I'm just kidding. I could have sworn that was taken out, or am I just imagining that?
I'm sorry. I think it was taken out because you mentioning it just now just made me burst out, and I wish it was in the movie.
Yeah.
But now I know it wasn't.
It was a funny moment.
They have the sequence where his head like goes, you see him through the boat, but they don't have him actually say that.
Yeah, which I think is a good thing. As much as I found it funny in the trailer, it wouldn't really fit that scene. He wouldn't be in that mode at that point.
Completely broken the tension.
Yeah. But it was a great line in the trailer, though.
We still got the funny bit of comedy where he grabs the lab from Sonny's hand.
Yeah, and
Sonny's just hanging from this building. He's like,
"You're embarrassing
yourself.
Let
go. You're just embarrassing yourself." And he just starts shaking it a little because
and pokes him.
Then he starts to get a little bit woozy because they establish that growing puts more stress on your organs than shrinking does for some reason.
Well, the air capacity, if nothing else. I think
right,
is the idea.
yeah.
But also, thinking about it, when he was shaking it, why wasn't everyone in that laboratory turned to paste? I mean, obviously, Hank's fine, but was Bill was still taken out at that point? Was he out of the laboratory?
Yeah, Bill was out.
Remember, he had the ant follow him out.
Yeah, it's because we've jumped around the sequences a bit here.
My question is, how did the ants do? Well, ants are tough, but still, it's kind of shocking considering how often that little building gets shaken about, and it's like, how's the lab on the inside not a total disaster zone?
The lab I can buy because they've clearly just bolted everything down.
Bolted everything,
bolted everything down, and maybe they created some variant of the Ant-Man field that just say some sort of inertial dampener.
Yeah, something. Anything to hammer with. It's just fun.
I wouldn't put an inertial dampener past them either, given the sort of tech they're messing around with. Like, they're shrinking down to the quantum level. They created a giant portal to enter the quantum realm. You're telling me people who can create that can't make an inertial dampener?
There's a joke in the film. You just put the word quantum in front of everything. I mean, if you're playing with quantum physics, then you can do pretty much anything. So it makes sense that they'd be able to do something like that, or just magnetize things so it's bolted to the background, the loose stuff. But anyway, we digress.
Yes, but anyway, he passes out. Mm-hmm. He passes out and falls into the bay, and Wasp jumps in to go save him successfully, thankfully.
Yeah. And they have
shrinks him down,
drags him up onto the boardwalk and snogs him.
Yep.
It's a nice moment again because at this point they've not really had this great get over the problems they had, because there weren't that real a problem to get over in the first place. It was just kind of a speed bump that they've been gradually getting past with each little moment. So this was the culmination of that, and just the acceptance of both of them getting properly back on track again.
Yeah. That right there is actually a perfect example of why the dynamic between them worked so well. It wasn't, you did something stupid, I hate you. It's, I love you, but I'm not sure if I can trust you because you're kind of stupid.
At least at this moment, it was each step go along the way. She was like, "Oh, you're being an idiot," and he's like, "Yeah, I know, I'm sorry." Yeah, there was.
But at this moment, she's just like, you're good.
Yeah, the problems are tied to their dynamic rather than the dynamic being split apart because of problems. If you know what I mean, it's they've not quite they've not quite got through the rough patches yet. And they're not fully formed as partners. This is what this film is supposed to do. Ant-Man and the Wasp. They're now going to be their own version of the dynamic duo. Which is going to be interesting moving forward with what they do with that.
Yes, indeed. So, as I said, we next cut to Hank in the quantum realm, and he finally reunites with Janet, and we get some dialogue explaining a little bit what she's been up to and how the quantum realms affected her. Apparently, being in there so long has caused her evolution to accelerate and change, and she's basically become this new, I guess, thing. Version of human, which allowed her to survive and manipulate the realm and gives her the ability to potentially help Ghost. So she,
in other words, Michelle Pfeiffer is now God.
Yeah.
Not quite. Sort of. Yeah, not quite, but
no.
But again, the reunion between them is very touching, I thought.
I'm expecting her to have like a bit more of a kind of reality warping, like quasi effect similar to Scarlet Witch, but that's just a side note. As you said, the most important thing is that emotional reunion. And it wasn't overplayed. I liked that it wasn't overplayed. It was very simple, very. It was kind of cheesy and cliche, I suppose.
You just see the just relief and love and shock on Hank's face when they finally see for the first time in decades, and it's so much, and so much of it's conveyed just from their performances alone. So it's really
I also
well
got
done.
to say, Callan mentioned this in our little preamble before we started. Michelle Pfeiffer's Wasp suit with the hood made her look like Tali Zora from Mass Effect, which was awesome.
Tali Zora and something from Destiny that I've seen in posters before.
And you actually see her take the mask off rather than a picture.
Yes.
But yeah, you're right, Evan, about the performances. I liked it. Obviously, they had dialogue present, but the emotion of the moment came from just the visual expressions they had as they looked at each other. It was because it's been a long time, and you definitely get the sense of partnership and bond they had together, which is then obviously re-sparked again here moving forward.
Yeah, Douglas and Pfeiffer really work off each other really well. I'm surprised they're not movies together.
Yeah, very well. It was very effective. And then obviously we get this scene where they go into the cockpit and they just kind of get a bit of an exposition dump and explain what's happened and what the ultimate resolution is going to be and why. And this is all stuff that's going to be very interesting moving forward because it explains kind of how the realm works, and how it might have some effect on the story, with the future films.
Yep. So they go back to the real world and, well, they crash into the real world, I should say, and have their final confrontation with Ghost, during which Janet attempts to cure her, which she succeeds in without killing herself, thankfully.
Yes.
Yeah. And we also get the reunion between Hope and Janet, obviously, and it's that's also something that's played off really well.
Yep. And I also did like Janet's meeting with Scott because it's still very much, so you're my daughter's boyfriend.
Yeah, and again, it doesn't say it like that. It just you get the immediate effect of she looks over him and is like, so you're Scott then. Just everything is shown in the eye, the expressions of the faces and the eye contact and everything. It was very well done. The humor carried across from that alone, which is effective.
Well, it's awkward to meet your girlfriend's parents,
especially in such context. But I like as well that the combination of what happened with Ava. The villain is undone here, both as a threat, but also her character. She's been fixed now, her affliction, and that clearly has a visible effect on who she is because she understands that she was doing wrong. She was at the point where the strain of it all just pushed her past caring. And that's why she's effective for me. I said that she needed that moment beforehand, that she had this sort of quasi-resolution or at least halting of the dark path she was going down before. But even without that, this is effective for me.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting because, she still needed to be a threat within the context of the storyline, and she was always sympathetic. It's like, even when she started going too far.
Because where she's coming from, what kind of backstory she's had, and the trauma and effect on her upbringing, if nothing else, that's going to have caused. All played off as well with the mirror of her relationship with Bill. It's about the interactions between them, because we haven't mentioned that, which you probably should. He's talking about it, saying, I won't be a part of any further violence. We're not going to do that. Especially when she mentions we can grab the kid. It's like, no, I will not be party to this. That helps reflect her own realization of what she was doing. At one point she's like, okay, fine, there are other ways, and then at the later point she's like, I don't care. It helps give you a gauge for how far gone she is.
Yep. And the best thing is that now that she's cured, she's like, no, leave me, I did horrible things. I deserve to be clapped in irons. I'm literally an assassin. And he's like, no.
Yeah, and it's the bookend for both of their characters. She has her little redemption in the fact that she's now being selfless, and the problems came from the strain she had before, and he's having the bookend of now his final resolution of, no, I'm not going to abandon you. I wouldn't be party to the stuff you were doing before, but I was never going to abandon you. And then they just move off. We never find out obviously we know the ending of ultimately from the post-credit scene, but we don't see what happens to them. I like that. It keeps it ambiguous because there's stories to be told there. Maybe even their own films they want to go for a next generation thing.
Yeah, if nothing else, the fact that the character is now free to build her life, without this horrible thing looming over her every minute of every day. She's no longer a superpowered individual. That's the impression I had. By putting her back in phase, she no longer has the phasing power. She's just a person.
Yeah, but at the same time, leaving it ambiguous, she could now just have more finite, painless control of it. We just don't know. There's stuff that we play with, whichever they way.
I mean, she still has her assassin skills, too.
That as well. But I definitely agree, Connor. I get the impression that she's lost the power now.
Which, frankly, for her is the best thing that could happen to her, because it means that she truly is free to build her life. No one's going to be wanting her anymore, because that was part of the reason why she was forced to become an assassin in the first place. It's because her condition made her a commodity.
As sad as that is, yeah. But this is the point where obviously we get to the wrap up of the film, and everyone kind of goes their separate ways to have their conclusion moments.
Scott gets home in time to get his ankle monitor taken off.
Yes.
So he's no longer under house arrest.
Yeah, we haven't really mentioned the FBI character. He was the cheesiest part of this film by a country mile. But yeah, the repeated sprints back to the house to kind of hide the fact that he's been missing. And this resolves here. It's not really part of the plot really. Beyond the tension of needing to remain hidden from the fact that he's left this house. He comes back, he gets the ankle removed, they have the moment where they can finally go outside again. the kind of awkward, like, so do you want to get dinner? I mean, it was humorous, if weird. Yeah. And then obviously Hank and Janet on the island.
Yes, with their house. They go on a little much-needed vacation with each other, and then we also cut to a sequence where Scott and Hope and Cassie are at a drive-in, or at least that's what we're led to believe at first.
I don't know why, but this idea, I just loved it. I mean, obviously it was a great idea, but just the fact that you know it's going to happen, but at the same time kind of don't, because you're focusing on the emotion of the moment first. You know, you don't care about the background stuff. It kind of works well in the car. The car perspectives help hide the size thing, even if you obviously expect it from what this film's shown before. You're not thinking about it because you're looking at what the interactions are, which is a very nice bonding as well.
Well, that's almost the best thing. It's the fact that it almost doesn't matter if the car is big or small. It's people in the car. Pay attention to them. Yeah. They're what matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when obviously it does go back into the background, oh, of course. And it's kind of the nodding of the haha funny is what makes the moment even funnier. Because again, the scale thing never gets old. It's intrinsically hilarious.
It's like I mentioned this earlier about how the best thing about this movie is that it fully explores all of the ramifications of the Ant-Man shrinking tech, and this explores the ramification of the technology becoming mundane.
Precisely. It's like, oh well, of course we're going to use it for this.
Well, hey, I mean, do you know how many few drive-ins are still left? I mean, those things aren't easy to get to, so you know, might as well make one.
The saddest thing is that the movie theater I currently work at is across the street from an empty lot that used to be a drive-in theater. And that drive-in theater was where I first saw the movie The Fifth Element.
Oh, it would have been fun. They're very much dying out, though. It's the whole... I don't know why they are experiencing it anymore, I guess.
It's so sad, because drive-in theaters were just so awesome, because, you know, truly going to a movie as a family.
I mean, as far as I'm aware, they've not really ever been a thing here. I've certainly never encountered anything to do with that as an experience, but it may have been prior to my time, I don't know. But yeah, I imagine it would be quite fun.
Well, I mean, they were bigger. They were bigger before our time. It's just
of course, yeah. But like, I've never even had the slightest hint of it being a thing here. So if it does exist, it's very peripheral. But yeah. Anyway, but we have
so
Hank and Janet
that's
on
when
the
we
island,
get to the them on the island,
which is just
and then we
because the house did survive.
Yeah.
And we'll see where they go with that later on.
And then we get it cuts to the credits, and then we get there's a mid-credit scene, and then there's a post-credit scene.
Yes, post-credit scene is absolutely essential that you must watch for the pivotal exploration of this extremely talented ant character that will be very much vital for the rest of the series. He will be the great drummer of our time. Yeah, that was irritating. I didn't like waiting for the entirety of the credits just to get that, but whatever. The more important bit is the prior one, where we get...
Yes, Scott goes into the quantum realm in order to collect energy, to power their new devices. He goes in there.
Nice little mundane exploration of the fact that they were using it to help Ava as well. You know, it was the healing quantum energy. I liked that it was there was a good reason for it. They weren't just fucking around with the quantum realm for no reason.
But it ended up being timed very, very poorly, because it was apparently
or perfectly,
the moment,
depending on your perspective.
Or perfectly, depending on your perspective.
50-50.
It's either Scott is trapped in the quantum realm with no assistance and is therefore doomed, or Scott is in the quantum realm and can now become a god. But unfortunately, just as they send him to the quantum realm, that's when Thanos gets hold of the Infinity Gauntlet and hand waves half of the life in the universe, because fuck Thanos.
Yep, and Hank, Janet, and Hope
are reduced to dust.
Yes.
I don't want to
go. Scott... Yeah. And I must say, this sequence where Scott's like, guys, and like you see the ash falling, it's a little bit chilling, I must say, but yeah, which ends with him being trapped in the quantum realm, and we'll discuss what we think that could come of that in a little bit, but one hell of a way to end the movie, I will say.
It was very chilling, very well placed in the credits, because if this had been at the end of the film, it would have kind of spoilt the tone of the film. But being post-credits, it can be its own little separate entity, and I like that fact. It was a good choice.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that when I first saw the movie, I didn't actually stay for the post-credit scenes, because I had already seen them, because I work at a movie theater.
Right. I will say this. I expected Hank to go, I did not like Hope though going surprised me. I was surprised that
I understand
that
why,
because
they've got a very limited pool of characters left they want to focus on for the finale of the Infinity War sequence. So having Ant-Man and the Wasp would have been another 2 characters rather than just the one they need to get the plot elements across. Because obviously the Quantum Realm is going to have something to do with the undoing of Thanos, or at least the vehicle to get to that point. If nothing else than time travel. So I can understand them leaving her out of it, as they did with so many of the other characters in the series. But at the same time, I would have liked to see them together.
I mean, I thought it was just going to be Hank and Janet. I thought Scott and Hope were going to make it, but no, I guess not.
It kind of almost would have been more tragic for me if she'd been left just weeping, like over the audio. So he's there, what's wrong? Yeah. Hope, what's wrong? And she's just literally just weeping at the fact that her parents have just turned to ash before her eyes. And that would have been like her crying and it fading out. Like, hope. That would have been a really good end for me. If they were going to keep her in, but obviously they chose not to. She's off the roster for the moment.
Yep. Yeah. And then we get the essential post-credit scene with the ant. And then we get something interesting, how a lot of the Marvel movies end with, so-and-so will return, or so-and-so will return in, or sometimes they'll even just show a straight-up trailer like they did for the first Avengers movie. But in this case, it says Ant-Man and Wasp will return, ... question mark.
Yes.
That's a first.
Yeah, leaving
so it keeps the ambiguity up because we don't know what's going to happen, Well, even though we all know what's probably going to happen, but you never know
what's going to happen. But how is it going to happen?
Yes.
Is it going to happen the way we think it is? That's the question.
Yeah.
You are now about to enter the scary door.
But yeah, it was a nice end. I liked it.
Movie.
It kind of capped off its relevance for the Infinity War story without dominating the tone of the film at all. It was well done. A good choice on keeping it separate. But yeah. Thoughts on the film as a whole, I guess. What did we think? Because I came out of this thinking it was a very fun experience. I had a good time, but at the same time, I wasn't blown away by anything. It was a fun experience, and it kind of didn't need to be more than that for me.
I actually totally agree with that, because that's kind of what makes the Ant-Man movies work so well, is the fact that they're just so humble and down to earth. It's like which in a way is what they need to be able to, because they're dealing with, well, basically this quantum shrinking technology that allows you to go subatomic. It's like, it seemed to me that the only way they could play this thing with a straight face without, getting either too high-minded or too ridiculous is by trying to keep things as down to earth as possible and presenting this technology in a very mundane fashion, which is kind of what makes it so believable, even though it's utterly ridiculous comic book science. It's like, but they just treat it like this coffee cup.
Excuse the pun, but it is a small story. It doesn't have to be this great epic. It's about the human characters and the human struggle and their own personal wants and desires tied around, as Evan said at the start, that family, dynamic and appeal. It makes it very wholesome, very pure. It's a nice follow-up to the Infinity War, because you were never going to up the scale of it. You shouldn't up the scale of the Infinity War until the next part of that story comes out. So this was like a nice step aside, while also adding to the mythos and the questions that we have moving forward.
Yeah. If Infinity War was a really, really good modern age comic movie, this would be like a really, really good Silver Age comic movie.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not even a fan of the Silver Age, to be honest. It's
I know, but like the best of the Silver Age is what I'm saying.
Yeah, of course. The wholesome, the fun, the light. The stuff before it went all edgy and dark and gritty, which is also amazing, but in different ways.
And the other thing I like about this movie being such a smaller story is the fact that pretty much every single character involved in this whole thing, top to bottom, is a criminal, is on the wrong side of the law. Yeah. And I actually find that aspect of the MCU universe to actually be really interesting to examine and discuss, because it's like alien invasion. We now have access to all of this alien tech from the crashed alien ships and their discarded weapons. Well, how does this affect? Exactly. I wanted to discuss how it connected to Homecoming, because it's like, to me, it's like this is examining the underworld that's rising up in response to all of these events, because every single aspect of society would be shaken, including the criminal underworld, because what are you going to do now that you got these guys who are basically selling disintegration rays or anti-gravity beams?
It's shown very well in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as well, so that and Homecoming explore this kind of story and idea. Even Age of Ultron, we see it with the Hydra bases that they're using the tech as well. So there's definitely... It's not a particularly complex plan outside of the continuity factors, but they have a plan with the universe. They're moving forward in each phase. It's not just a stupid term to explain the seasons of films. When they say phase, they mean planned out phase for the characters, the stories, the themes, the hype levels of each individual era.
Because of that, what they're doing is they did what the Star Wars expanded universe did so well, is they expanded outwards in a very natural, organic fashion, where they actually thought, okay, what are the things that are going on in this universe that we need to be addressed? Okay, let's make a story to address that.
They're plucking the stuff they've already created and using it for new and innovative ways. And allowing, it's kind of rewarding you for keeping along with the story. You're not just going and seeing.
It took them some time for them to do that. There are several things they established in Phase 1 that never got explained or brought up later.
Not a flawless creation by any stretch.
But better late than never, you know.
But the fact that they're striving and are now at this point achieving their goals by and large in this area, it's so rewarding for the viewer, because they're not just going and seeing another Marvel film, another Marvel film, another Marvel. It's expanding addition to a greater whole, which it's kind of making history. This has never been done before on the scale that it is currently being done by them.
I don't know.
In 50 years' time, this will be a film event. This will be a thing that happened and has changed the way films are made, at least for a temporary amount of time.
Yes.
And the other thing I do want to say is, despite the fact that the MCU is at the point where it is building on its own plot lines and is being a lot more self-referential, it's still doing so in a manner that isn't hostile to newcomers. If you sat down someone who had never before watched a Marvel movie and sat him down and got him to watch Ant-Man and the Wasp, it's still a self-contained experience where everything is tied up in a neat little bow at the end and everything is wrapped up. It's not like you need to see enjoyable. And it's not like you need to be super, super familiar with the entirety of the MCU to understand this movie. On my end, I'm actually a little bit behind on my MCU. It's like the only stuff I've seen lately has been this, Doctor Strange, Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Captain America Civil War passed me by and I barely even noticed. And while I should definitely get on that and go see it, I don't feel that not having seen it makes this movie any lesser.
Precisely. They make subtle nods to what's come before, outside of exceptions that define the arcs of stories in the larger films. You don't need to have seen every single one of them to get the independent films kind of messages and what they're generally going for. And Ant-Man's probably the best example of that, because of the fact that he's kind of completely separated from the other characters where a few others aren't. For example, Spider-Man's attached to Iron Man. Captain America had his entire film hijacked by the fact that he's connected to the Avengers. All of this stuff.
Exactly. But yeah, overall, massive, success of a film, highly recommended. I would say I liked this. I would say that it is superior to the original Ant-Man, but in not a demeaning sort of way. I just think it has more to it. To me, this film took everything the original Ant-Man did right and just expanded on it.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Like a good sequel.
It's a sequel that truly builds on its predecessor.
Mm-hmm.
Completely agree. It's an extension of the original material, not like just a second telling of a different story. It very much feels like you could watch them back to back, and obviously with the gap filled of a Civil War, and it would make perfect sense. I enjoy it for that level. I don't think I prefer it to the first one. I think they're just kind of the same for me in different ways. The individual moments in this one I definitely prefer, for the emotional side. Comedy, I think I actually prefer the first one because they did more with the scale. Particularly in the end villain fight. I always remember that train moment when it's coming towards him and then it zooms out and it's just a toy just falling over. I laughed my arse off at that. And there are more moments like that in the original, I think. But yeah, basically stand on equal footing for me, which for a sequel is a high standing.
Right. So I guess with that settled, we should get into characters, unless anyone has anything else to wrap up.
Well, I mean, we've pretty much covered all of them thus far, haven't we?
Does anyone have anything else to say about any? I mean, I do feel like we covered just about everything already. If anyone has any, I will say this: I did kind of want a Lawrence Fishburne versus Paul Rudd giant fight, and I'm a little disappointed. I'm like, no, because that would have been like if giant Lawrence Fishburne fighting giant Paul Rudd. I mean, come on.
Hannibal versus
time,
Jack,
maybe.
step aside.
Yeah, I know.
They can go with that later on in another film and have it be like they have a sparring match or something as giants, and when he's more of a character,
Yeah.
if they want. But I don't think they're going to go that route. But I see.
Yeah,
what you're
I mean,
saying.
I would have broken the tension and the tone a bit, but it just would have been like cathartic.
One thing I have to say is after the scene at the start of the movie with Michelle Pfeiffer at just interacting with little girl Hope and how funny she was, if they don't have an interaction between Janet and Cassie, we need an interaction between Janet and Cassie. Like, seriously.
A family outing in the next film would be wonderful to see. But we've got a lot to get past before we can reach that point. They're just harsh at this moment.
Yes, which leads
we
us.
We don't know what happened to Cassie.
Yeah. Well,
I don't feel
getting
so
into
good.
that. Future theories for characters and the plot for the characters in this film. So, Ant-Man's the only one left. He's in the quantum realm. What do we think is going to happen?
Well, I think it firstly depends. Like, the first thing to address is how does he or does he not survive the quantum realm? Secondly, we know that a large portion of the cast is going to be resurrected by the Time Stone once they get the chance. So, because they're not. So many of the people they're killing off, they're not going to stay dead. That's obvious.
Of course not. Yeah.
The question is, which characters get brought back by the Time Stone? Like,
in my opinion,
let me finish. Do we operate under the assumption that every member of this cast who is confirmed dead is brought back, or only some of them?
We know with absolute certainty that Ant-Man will be in Avengers 4.
Yeah, he's definitely not going to die. That's not even a possibility. Yeah. They wouldn't put him there if otherwise they would have just ashed him. Yeah. But as far as I'm concerned, everyone's going to be brought back, with possible exception of Gamora for the way she died prior to the snap rather than as a result of it. But the question is, who then stays dead after the fact? I'm getting the impression that at least Captain America and Tony will be dead, for example.
Yeah. I will say this because it's basically highly speculated at this point that time travel is going to play a role in Avengers 4 with, Ant-Man being one of the keys to it. And we've even had set photos that kind of more or less confirm that. What I think is going to happen is that Avengers 4 is going to take place years and years. There's going to be a time skip between Infinity War and Avengers 4, or whatever they end up calling it. And basically, we're going to get reintroduced. Ant-Man's going to come back, but he's basically going to be Quantum Ant-Man. He's going to evolve in the same way that Janet did. And he's going to basically use his new abilities to help the remaining Avengers travel through time. That's what I expect, and that I actually think that's supported by one of the. I think it's actually Janet's last line in the film, where she's like, "Don't get caught into a time tunnel. You don't know when or where you'll end up, or something like that." They wouldn't have put that in there unless it served a purpose. So what I think is going to happen, it's going to take time for him to learn how to evolve and control the quantum realm. He's going to do it. He's going to go back to the real world, realize that what's happened, help the Avengers, and then that's going to play in. Also, Cassie Lang, in the comics, for those of you who read comics, she eventually grows up and becomes the superhero Stature, who, from the Young Avengers. And there have been rumors that a teenager has been cast to play her in Avengers 4, just rumors. So I could see that definitely becoming a possibility, especially with this movie saying, hey, I could be your partner. Maybe she will be.
Yep.
I don't necessarily subscribe to the time travel element, but definitely the lack of aging from him as a result of going to the quantum zone could be a factor. But the main thing for me is this is the perfect time, phase-wise, quote-unquote, to address the problem of kind of original characters. They're going to have to lose some of the original actors at this point, and we need a new generation to step into the fray. So if they're going to do a time jump, that's kind of the perfect time to do it. The next generation of heroes stepping into it and becoming involved and not overshadowing the original, because they're the ones who have to ultimately solve the Thanos crisis, but giving us a flash of what's to come and then dialing it way back, restarting it with the Time Stone issue or situation, bring everyone back, and then losing a few of the originals that then get replaced over time as we move into the future films.
Well, I mean, due to Marvel's, full continuity-wide reboot that they had a couple years ago with Secret Wars, a lot of legacy characters have been introduced with admittedly limited success on some parts, but we won't get into that. So it's definitely a possibility.
Yep.
It's how complicated one to get is the question, because it's very
Well, I doubt they're gonna do Jane Foster as Thor.
No, of course they're not going to do that. But I'm saying that the
Natalie Portman's, I think, never gonna ever be in MCU ever again.
But no, the thing is though,
Just saying.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that they've got to, if they want to introduce time travel, they have to do it in such a way that it's very simple to track continuity. Because if they're not going to go the comic route of exploding like continuities into
sure?
millions of fractured
I think
routes.
that's what they're gonna do.
I
actually think
they
that's
will.
what they're
The
gonna
simplicity
do.
of the continuity in the films is what makes the MCU so approachable and so successful.
Well,
If they
you
fracture
could
it the
have
same
a
way they
time
do for
travel movie and still be able to follow it.
Yeah, of course, but that's what I'm saying. It has to be time travel. It can't be like a point where, okay, all of the different timelines are scattered and converged like they do in the comics just to reset the canon, because it would make it too complicated. Film viewers aren't going to want that. So whatever it is, I'm pretty sure it's going to be, we'll see something, it will be undone, and then we'll get the actual conclusion.
Yeah.
And
I mean, there's way too much evidence that to not say time travel will be a factor.
Involving Captain Marvel, if nothing else. What were you going to say, sorry, Connor?
Yeah.
I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
That's right. So yeah, Captain Marvel and Ant-Man are basically the keys to the next step, in whatever way they choose to make it so. But that plus a time skip is all I'm really clinging to at this point.
Yeah.
If they even go for the time skip, because they don't need to do that. That's just a possibility.
Well, maybe not a time skip, but time travel for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, that's a given.
I'm still holding back to my idea that Thanos is going to be undone by the Soul Stone and the Time Stone, respectively. Time Stone for the fact that there's a trap attached to it in the gauntlet from the enchantment that's very unbreakable, and also the fact that the Soul Stone is going to be the one that makes him basically undo his own making. He'll use the other half of the gauntlet that will be destroyed when he snaps his fingers for the second time and undo everything, in my mind.
Reality alters, and then suddenly mutants?
Well, yeah, that's the other thing. If they time it right, they can use this reality jump back to introduce elements that have been absent previous to this.
Actually, the thing is that my personal mentality is that keeping the X-Men and other natural-born mutants out of the MCU actually makes a lot more sense than incorporating them in, because a lot of it just comes down to the different reactions of superpowered individuals. Why would the existence of natural-born mutants like the X-Men be a big deal if you've already got enhanced beings like Captain America or frickin' aliens from other planets?
I agree. It's
that's true. That's been an issue in Marvel, like overall.
Exactly, which is why keeping the X-Men out of the MCU, as far as I'm concerned, is necessary, because a huge part of the X-Men's theme and conflict is the racial prejudice against mutants, a prejudice that makes absolutely no sense when aliens and artificially enhanced beings and cyborgs already exist.
And in general sense, there really isn't that much of a thing. And what's funny is I like that DC actually addresses that, like in their comics. They make it poignant that, people like Martian Manhunter or Aquaman aren't seen as like so crazy due to the things that like other heroes have done. That's actually something they don't address that in Marvel, but DC does address it, which I like.
It's just that disconnect between the X-Men's situation and everyone else's. It's just it's something that's never made sense in the continuity, but it's just a result of the story that they go with, tension and tone wise. But anyway, we're way off key there.
How would to wrap this up? How would you guys rate Ant-Man and Wasp compared to the rest of the MCU?
I'd give it a rock solid 7 out of 10. It's really, really good on just about every level. There are no real flaws that break the experience, but at the same time, it doesn't really blow your mind or bring this into new areas. But in its own way, that's by design. It's just kind of there as a nice little fun escapade. It's not trying to reshape the entire universe.
Right. Which, Grant, I agree, and like even though a film doesn't necessarily have to be that universe shaking to be one of the best, I certainly would say like this one doesn't break top 5 for me, but I would still definitely say rock solid 7, maybe even possibly 7.5 out of 10.
For me, it's a
6 as well.
For me, it's a 6 for the same reasons. I
really
would need for this, given the simplicity and the smaller scale nature of the story, which as you said, by design is definitely the way they should have gone for it. They needed a much more tightly wrapped, innovative, clever, thematic, emotional core to this story that revolves around the plot itself for me to be blown away by it as its simplicity. But for what it is, it works very well. It's perfectly good, reasonable addition to the story. It doesn't damage the tone of itself or the current phase placement in the overall Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's a fun film. That's all it needed to be, and that's all it was. I look forward to where the story goes with it in the future. So yeah, those are our thoughts on Ant-Man and the Wasp, guys, as well as the greater MCU as a whole on the tail end of that one. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and we'll see you for the next MCU film when it eventually comes out, which will be Captain Marvel.
Yep. It's going to be interesting.
One of my favourite characters.
Yeah.
I am Reti 4, and I still don't have an outro.
Evannova 95, we hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you guys later.
Jensaarai 1, signing out. Good night.
Goodbye.